Welcome to this episode of Ask the Guitar Coach, the only podcast where you get answers to all your guitar-related questions. If you're interested in developing your guitar skills and reaching your music goals, please send me an email at the email address ioannis@ioannis.org. That is ioannis@ioannis.org, so that I can let you know about all the different packages of elite guitar coaching and how you can get private coaching by me. Without further ado, let's go to our question for the day. I'm confused with scales. There are different pentatonics, different scales, all of them in several different positions and methods. There are modal scales, different modal systems. I need a lifetime to memorize this, not to mention start using them and creating music. So this is a very good question statement, whatever you want to call it. Yes, and I totally understand what you mean and sympathize with you, and I get this a lot from my students, and it's a lot for everybody really. It's not just for the students, even for people who are more advanced and have been doing this for years. So I'm going to try to just give you a different way to look at it, so something that I've seen that works well over and over again. The most important thing is you need to enjoy the process and you need to be in love with the process. You don't see it as a marathon. Oh, I have to get to learn all these scales before I start creating music. There has been a lot of amazing music that's been written from people who only knew a couple of scales, and they only used those scales to write this music. So don't see it as a sprint. You have to understand that this is a marathon. This is a lifelong endeavor. It's not something that's going to be over in a couple of years. Learning all those things and those systems and those scales and those sounds and everything. The next thing is you are not going to end up using all of these, because just like everything else, like when you learn a language, you end up after several years of learning a language with your favorite words and your favorite expressions. I mean, you might understand what is going on when you listen, but you're not using all the words that you've ever learned in your vocabulary. So don't worry about this too much. My understanding of scales and the way I do it in my teaching, and I've seen that brings out the best results because I've tried it several ways throughout the last 2.5 decades that I've been teaching, actually a little more than that, is the following. One can only learn 2, maximum 3 different scales per year. Because when you learn a scale, you should not just learn like one position of a scale and be done with it and say, oh yes, I know the Mixolydian scale, for example. You need to learn all the positions of the scale. You need to learn the 3 notes per string patterns. You need to learn the chords that go with the scale, that are harmonized with the scale. You need to learn the chord progression that are used for the scale, and you also need to learn licks that bring out the sound of the specific scale. So it is really not as simple as just learning a couple of positions and then thinking that you know this scale. In order to learn all this material, you need to invest a lot of time into it. That makes perfect sense. So if you invest enough time and it takes you, for example, 6 months to follow this whole process I told you, then you're less likely to forget what you have learned and practiced for 6 months. On the other hand, if you try to do what I hear from several people, the process that they try to use is, oh, I have like 15 days now that I'm not working, I'm going to learn the whole modal system. They will cram this knowledge into their heads, and then a few weeks afterwards, they will have forgotten pretty much almost everything from it, because it doesn't work this way. It has to become a part of who you are on the instrument. It's not something that you memorize for an exam for a couple of hours and then it's okay if you forget it. Another thing that makes things very complicated when it comes to scales is the order in which you're supposed to learn them. So for rock guitar players, I suggest the following order. The first year, just follow work on learning the pentatonic scale, the blues scale, and then the natural minor scale. Once you are in your second or third year, then learn the Dorian scale, harmonic minor, and also the Mixolydian scale. Now you might have noticed that strangely absent from this list is the major scale. The reason for that is that major scale is much more rarely used in rock music. So even though it's a very useful construct to have an understanding of for your theory, when it comes to actually learning shapes and playing with it, it's used much less than the other scales I mentioned, at least in most styles of rock music. There are exceptions in southern rock and country and so on and so forth, but usually for most styles of music you would use the other scales I mentioned before much more. So this is the order I suggest you learn the scales. So what's the deal with modal scales? Well, this is going to be a subject of a whole other video, but very briefly, you can see modal scales as small variations of the regular scales. Like for example, a Dorian mode is just a minor scale with a major sixth. So and so on with other different modes. And this is a good way to give you a head start when you're learning that mode, meaning you would not be playing and thinking, oh, I'm going to play a minor scale when you want to play a Dorian scale and just say I'm going to add a sixth. You have to learn the shapes, but it's definitely going to give you a head start if you have this kind of understanding. And then again, pentatonics, arpeggios, and triads are just simplifications and expansions of each other. So there are ways to do that. Obviously, we cannot do all these things in this 5-minute video, but I think I gave you enough ideas on how to approach the subject so that you can go to the next step. So there you have it. I hope this was a helpful video, and I will see you on the next episode of Ask the Guitar Coach. Until then, keep sending me your questions and I'll do my best to answer them in a future video. Bye bye.